Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Andrea Gonzalez with Trellis Strategies, and we are so excited to have everybody tune in and hear from our research team. All right, how about we get started? Brian, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you everybody for joining us here today. My name is Brian Ashton. I serve as Chief Strategy and Growth Officer with Trellis and want to welcome you all to our Fall 2024 Aggregate Report webinar on our Student Financial Wellness Survey. We are so excited to be with you all here today to talk about the findings of the fall administration of the Student Financial Wellness Survey. We've been administering this since 2018 and continue to grow and evolve the instrument and add new questions and present new findings. And we're excited to bring some of those to you here in advance of our formal release of this report on Monday. I want to thank everybody. There's many on this call that have been a part of this instrument over the years that have helped to shape the questions, have been involved in the instrument review, and we're really thankful for all of the work that has went into this across the field. Also very thankful for all of the participating institutions that have partnered with us to administer this since 2018, and most importantly, to the learners that have shared their voice throughout that process. And so there will be a lot of findings here today that you will see from our 2024 data collection. And then we are very fortunate to be joined by three outstanding campus practitioners for a discussion in the second hour. So with that, I will turn it over to Allyson and Carla, who have been the primary drivers of this instrument, and so very thankful for their leadership as we've continued to grow the Student Financial Wellness Survey. And so looking forward to the presentation and the findings today, and thank you everybody for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brian. My name is Allyson Cornett, and I serve as the Director of Research at Trellis Strategies, where I lead a team of mixed methods researchers to develop data-driven solutions to address the complex challenges of today's students. In this role, I oversee all of our survey and qualitative research projects, including the Student Financial Wellness Survey, which Carla leads. Carla, want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Carla Fletcher. I'm a research consultant here at Trellis. And as Allyson mentioned, I lead the Student Financial Wellness Survey. And my work at Trellis focuses primarily on higher education policy issues through the lens of affordability and wellness to help policymakers and practitioners advocate for student access and success.
Next slide. There we go. And now a little bit about Trellis Strategies. We are a nonprofit research consulting firm that is focused on advancing post-secondary education and strengthening the workforce. And since launching our survey shop back in 2017, 2018, we've surveyed over 5.3 million students and have been active in higher education research for well over 3 decades now, including projects like the Student Financial Wellness Survey. And the Student Financial Wellness Survey, or SFWS, we know it's a little bit of a long title. The SFWS is a self-reported online survey that documents the financial well-being and student success indicators of post-secondary students nationwide. Over the past 7 years, our team has deepened our understanding of these issues, particularly their impact on student success, the perceived value of education, and student support in higher education, all of which we'll be discussing and touching on today. On the institutional side, colleges and universities have used the survey results to raise funds, develop programs, assess initiatives, and affirm the importance of supporting their students. So this slide just offers a quick sneak peek at our upcoming aggregate report and infographic. These will be available on our website starting next week. And when we send out the recording of this webinar, we'll also include a copy of the aggregate report and infographic, just make it really easy for y'all. And so you can keep an eye out for these and the webinar recording next week. Before we dive into the findings, we can just review the metrics from our 2024 administration. So we had nearly an even split between 2- and 4-year students from 104 colleges and universities, resulting in over 53,000 responses. This yielded a response rate of nearly 8% and a completion rate of 82%, which we're happy with and are in line with other voluntary surveys of college students. Lastly, the survey was conducted over a 3-week period from late October to mid-November 2024, ensuring that students were well into their semester by the time they received their invitations. And as we kind of get into the data here, would really encourage any questions to go into the Q&A function or into the chat. We can kind of get to those at the end of the presentation. So we know that many college students experience financial insecurity while enrolled, and this state of instability is characterized by difficulty meeting their basic needs, frequent cash flow shortages, concerns about affording their educational expenses, and unexpected levels of student loan debt. And this translates into how students pay for college. In addition to financial aid, students must rely on multiple sources to fund their education. And in the 2024 SFWS, we saw students use an average of 2.9 different sources, including their income from their employment, scholarships, grants, loans, their personal savings, and contributions from their parents. In this chart and in those following, you can note our 2-year responses by the dark blue bars, and 4-year respondents will be in that dark orange. And looking at this data here, many of these self-reported sources are looking as we expect, such as the relatively high utilization of grants, scholarships, and student loans. However, we also see students in this very last grouping over here on the right, we also see students using credit cards, where 18% of 2-year students and 16% of 4-year students use credit to pay for college. With all this, it's not surprising that only 5% of our respondents were able to self-finance their education solely through their personal saving or current wages to pay for their college. And another not surprising statistic here, with all the borrowing and kind of leaning on different sources, we saw that 55% of student loan borrowers, so just those students who had student loans, we saw 55% of those students have more student loan debt than they expected at that point. And then I think even perhaps more concerningly, 70% of these students who had loans expressed a low confidence in their ability to repay the debt that they acquired during their education. And even after piercing together various sources of funding, reports of financial fragility were all too common amongst our respondents. Across both sectors, as we can see here, 71% of our students revealed they had faced financial challenges in college, with students at 4-year schools experiencing these financial difficulties at slightly higher rates than their 2-year counterparts. And these financial issues often lead to anxiety, with nearly half of students with financial challenges reporting that they have difficulty concentrating on their schoolwork because of their financial situation. And among all respondents to the 2024 SFWS, so no longer just looking at those who had borrowed loans, 56% would struggle to obtain $500 in cash or credit in order to meet an unexpected need within the next month. Students also reported running out of money at alarming rates. Across the survey, 68% exhausted their available funds at least once since January 1, 2024, and the time that they took the survey, and 22% ran out of money 8 or more times in that same time frame. And to help manage their financial burdens, some respondents in the 2024 SFWS turned to public assistance programs, including food assistance such as SNAP and medical assistance like Medicaid and CHIP. It was less common for students in the survey to report using utility assistance, housing assistance, or childcare assistance compared to those other 2 buckets. And now we're going to take a little bit of a deeper look at the credit card use among our respondents. So we saw other students turn to sources of credit to deal with their cash flow shortages. And we saw 57% of all respondents report using a credit card during 2024. Of these students, 89%, so nearly 9 in 10, had used their credit card to pay for their basic needs, such as food, transportation, or housing in that same time frame. And those who had used credit to afford their basic needs were less likely than their peers to pay their credit card bill on time, and they also reported carrying a balance month to month at higher rates. And you can see that here in these charts. In these charts, students who had used credit cards for basic needs are in blue, and then those who had not are represented in dark orange. So a little slight deviation from the 2-year, 4-year split we've been seeing. With finances being one of the top reasons that students stop out of college, it is really critical that institutions provide support services that help to address these issues and that students feel seen and understood on campus. Respondents in the 2024 SFWS were asked how their institution supported them as they navigated their finances. Overall, 59% said that their school had the support services to help them address their financial situation. And this is more common among 2-year students at 64% compared to just 54% of 4-year students. However, even with that, only 38% felt that their school was aware of their financial situation. So these students are likely not feeling like they're being seen or represented on campus. All of this financial pressure can lead to basic needs insecurity, which is reported by many college students. Basic needs insecurity is characterized as a persistent lack of access to resources necessary for maintaining health and well-being, including nutritious food, stable housing, childcare, reliable transportation, and access to mental health services. Students experiencing basic needs insecurity may experience negative repercussions to their academic performance, their mental health, and their overall well-being. And we'll get started with food insecurity, which is the limited or uncertain access to nutritious and adequate food, and it is widespread in post-secondary settings, with nearly a quarter of students reporting the condition in NIPSAF 20. In voluntary surveys, like the Student Financial Wellness Survey, the prevalence of food insecurity is often more pronounced. In the 2024 SFWS, 44% of undergraduate students face low or very low food security within the prior 30 days of taking the survey, so really any time between September to November of 2024. And here are some indicators of food insecurity to really put this into context to us. Nearly half, 45%, of all of our respondents could not afford balanced meals. 38% bought food that didn't last and had no money to get more. 34% cut the size of their meal because there wasn't enough money to get more food. We saw that a third ate less than they felt that they should because of a lack of funds. And then I think most troubling here, 27% were hungry but did not eat because there wasn't enough food. So those students were likely experiencing physiological symptoms of hunger. And these statistics clearly illustrate the critical need for interventions and support services to address food insecurity among college students, like food pantries. And despite 44% of our students experiencing food insecurity, only 17% had visited a food pantry either on or off campus during during the year from January 1, 2024 to the time that they took the survey in the fall. And beyond this kind of relatively low utilization rate, awareness of food pantries is another significant issue according to the 2024 SFWS. This bottom chart down here represents only students who are attending an institution with a food pantry. So among these students, 47% were unaware that their school offered a food pantry. And this could indicate gaps in communication and outreach, leaving many of these students in need unaware of available supports through their college or university. Our next area of well-being is housing insecurity, which is defined as lacking stable, safe, and affordable housing. And this is a serious threat to academic success, persistence, and retention. In the 2024 SFWS, we saw 43% of our survey respondents report experiencing housing insecurity in the prior 12 months. And some more indicators here. I really like diving into these to really help ground our findings in context. And we can see that 25% had difficulty paying their full utility bill, 24% had difficulty paying their rent or mortgage, and then 16% moved in with others due to financial problems. And then less commonly, we saw about 1 in 10 were not able to pay the full amount of their rent or mortgage, and 10% lived beyond the expected capacity of their dwelling, which can really be a serious physical safety risk, especially in case of an emergency. And the most extreme expression of housing insecurity is homelessness, which can include experiences like couch surfing, being thrown out of your home, or being evicted, staying in a shelter, or not knowing where you would sleep at night. And overall, we saw that 14% of our students were homeless or unhoused at the time of the survey or since starting college, with the most common expression of homelessness being couch surfing with family or friends while temporarily looking for shelter. So in total, 58% of our 2024 respondents had experienced food insecurity, housing insecurity, or homelessness. 29% of these students were both food and housing insecure in 2024. And then we saw 10% had experienced all three conditions: food insecurity, housing insecurity, and homelessness. And in our research and the research of others, we see that certain groups, including first-generation students, students who have experienced foster care, and students of color, are often disproportionately impacted by basic needs insecurity. In 2024, we saw pronounced rates of basic needs insecurity among students who had experienced foster care and Black students. And in fact, 83% of our former foster youth reported basic needs insecurity through their responses to the survey, compared to 58% of our overall survey respondents. Switching gears again to mental health, we all know that positive mental health is fundamental to the wellness, academic success, and overall satisfaction of college students. Despite its critical role in persistence, completion, and attainment of credentials of value, college students report poor mental health at high rates. To better understand the mental health landscape among college students, the SFWS employs two validated scales to assess the prevalence of major depressive disorder through the PHQ-2 and generalized anxiety disorder through the GAD-2, in addition to questions about loneliness and awareness of available mental health counseling services. And this analysis reveals that 33% of our 2024 respondents experienced symptoms of major depressive disorder, and 44% exhibited signs of generalized anxiety disorder, which is the most common mental health concern among college students. And some more indicators here to kind of really help us understand these findings. These numbers represent the frequency of students indicating a depressed mood or anxiety at least once in the prior 14 days. And we can see that 68% had little interest or pleasure in doing things at least once in the past few weeks when they were taking the survey. We also see that 62% felt down, depressed, or hopeless at least once in that same time frame. Reports of anxiety were even more common, with 80% being unable to stop or control their worrying, and 71% felt nervous, anxious, or on edge at least once in those prior 2 weeks. And when we look at reports of anxiety, overall, around 1 in 5 of our students felt this anxious nearly every single day of those past 14 days. Another critical component of mental wellness is feeling like you are in community and have connection with others. Loneliness among American adults has increased since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. This leads to approximately 36% of all Americans, including 61% of young adults aged 18 to 25, reporting that they feel lonely frequently or almost all the time or all the time. In the 2024 SFWS, we were able to demonstrate that this loneliness epidemic does extend to college students. Over half of our respondents indicated feeling lonely sometimes at 45%, occasionally at 12%, and then only 15% reported that they never feel lonely. So 85% of our students are feeling lonely at least some of the time. Research suggests that elevated levels of loneliness, like what we're seeing through the 2024 SFWS, are strongly associated with heightened psychological distress, and lonely individuals are more than 4 times as likely to experience negative or suicidal thoughts. Colleges and universities can promote positive mental health and reduce loneliness among students by fostering connection, developing or enhancing low-cost or no-charge counseling and support services, and creating supportive, inclusive environments. Nearly all of our participating institutions, about 96%, in the 2024 SFWS did offer mental health or counseling services to their students, which we love to see. I think that's a really positive number. But when we look at those students attending those institutions, we're still seeing those same kind of gaps in utilization and awareness as we do with food pantries. So 27% of respondents at schools who offered mental health services to their students, either at no charge, low cost, or free, these 27% were unaware of these resources. And this, again, kind of just highlights that opportunity for improved communication and outreach efforts to ensure all of our students know about the resources available to help them succeed in college. With that, I'll turn it over to Carla to cover the rest of our findings, starting with students who work.
Thank you, Allyson. So we're going to move into talking about some student personas and how they can impact the time students have available to focus on their academics. Adult learners, or what we like to call modern learners at Trellis, are more likely to face particular barriers to their success, such as work and family responsibilities, compared to their younger peers. Financial stress and reduced time to dedicate to academics can threaten their academic success. Allyson talked about financial insecurity earlier. We do see higher rates of financial insecurity among modern learners as compared to younger, more traditionally aged students, and higher rates of working and caregiving. So we're going to start out by looking at working students. About 2/3 of respondents to the 2024 survey, 67% overall, reported working for pay while enrolled. The rates are very similar between the two sectors, as you can see. Overall, among those who did work, 25% said that they had more than one job, but it does differ a bit between the sectors. 30% of working four-year respondents reported having more than one job compared to 21% of working two-year respondents. So we see a little more likely in the four-year sector to have multiple jobs. Among all undergraduate respondents who worked, 43% said they worked 40 or more hours per week, and another 38% worked 20 to 39 hours per week. And again, we do see some differences by sector in that 40 plus hours category. Almost half of working two-year respondents worked at least 40 hours per week, compared to a little over a third of working four-year respondents. And then in that second chart, that's full-time and part-time enrollment. I didn't probably label that as accurately as I could have. Students enrolled part-time were particularly likely to work long hours. More than half of part-time students were working 40 or more hours per week, and 90% were working at least 20 hours per week. So those part-time students were working a lot of hours. But we do still see long work hours among many full-time students as well. A third of full-time students were also working full-time, and about 3/4 of full-time students were working at least 20 hours per week. Now, of all of our employed students in the survey, 36% consider themselves to be workers who go to school rather than students who work. This varied by sector. Among two-year working respondents, almost half, 45%, saw themselves as workers first, while about a quarter of working four-year respondents saw themselves as workers first. So we do see a big difference there. And prioritizing that worker persona over the student persona can have potential implications for academic success. Not surprisingly, students who consider themselves to be workers first work longer hours than those who see themselves as students first. 2/3 of students who see themselves as workers who go to school work at least 40 hours per week, and 95% of them work at least 20 hours per week. Less than a third of students who identify as students first work 40 or more hours per week. So big difference in hours there. And so that's why we can see some differences in the way that these students see themselves. While work can affect class attendance and time allotted for studying, it can also impact other school-related activities. Nearly 2/3 of students who considered themselves to be workers first reported that their job interferes with their ability to engage in extracurricular activities or social events at their institution. And that is higher than what we see among students who see themselves as students first. But still, Half of those students who see themselves as students first also felt that their job interferes with those school activities. So we are seeing this impact a lot of students, but it does impact those who view themselves as workers first more, and likely because they're working those long hours, more likely to work longer hours than those who see themselves as students first. Well, beyond work commitments, many college students have financial and caretaking responsibilities within their families. And this is another persona that we see among students. In addition to potentially working, we see students providing support for their family in the form of caregiving or financial support. Research has shown that student parents are highly motivated. They want to improve their family's situation and serve as a role model for their children. But these learners face many challenges in their higher education journey, including time poverty, financial insecurity, and a low sense of belonging with their institution. As a result, over half of first-time enrolled students with children stop out at some point, compared to under a third of their non-parenting peers. So first, we're going to take a look at providing financial support to family members. This is a crucial obligation for many students. 53% of two-year respondents and 34% of four-year respondents said it was important for them to support their family financially while in college. And you can see this difference reflected in a series of questions that the series is displayed on the chart in the slide that we asked in the survey. We see higher rates among two-year respondents than four-year respondents for providing support for these various groups. Now, in the chart here, it shows those questions, but we're comparing students who identify as workers first to students who identify as students first. And so you can see the large differences between these groups and why it makes sense that some students are prioritizing that worker persona because they have these responsibilities, right? Being responsible for financially supporting others, even while enrolled in college, will impact some of that decision making about their time. We see higher rates of providing financial support to all of the listed groups of people for students who see themselves as workers first. 17% provide financial support to other family members, 22% support their own parents, 25% support a spouse, and 35% of working students who see themselves as workers first provide financial support for children. Across all of our undergraduate respondents, 18% reported being a parent. And we do see big differences here by sector. Almost a quarter of two-year respondents, 23%, reported being a parent, while 12% of four-year respondents said that they were a parent. We also have another question where we asked if they are a caregiver or legal guardian to other dependents other than children, and 7% of respondents said yes to this. And there's a lot of overlap between these two groups, being a parent or being a caregiver or legal guardian to other dependents. We see a lot of students who are providing care to these other dependents also have children. So overall, 19% of undergraduate respondents reported being a parent or caregiver for other dependents. And childcare is essential for student parents. It allows them adequate time to devote to learning, work, and other responsibilities. And not surprisingly, losing childcare would be very disruptive for many student parents. When faced with the hypothetical loss of childcare, 41% of surveyed student parents said that they would have less time to focus on their academics. 34% said they would need to take fewer classes or drop classes. 31% said they would be likely to get worse grades. Over a quarter said they would be less likely to enroll in future semesters. And that's pretty serious. And student parents who were younger than 25 reported even higher rates of stock-out risk, with 40% saying that they would be less likely to enroll in future semesters. Working and providing care for dependents can create significant time barriers that can impede students' academic progress. And we explore this in our survey using a series of questions about missing classes. So when looking at just student parents, 24% of them overall reported missing at least one day of classes in the prior semester due to a lack of childcare. And then looking at those who worked, 25% of those respondents overall reported missing at least one day of classes due to conflicts with their job. Transportation or lack of transportation can also be a barrier for some students. Overall, among all respondents, 15% reported missing classes sometimes, often, or always due to a lack of reliable transportation. And as you can see in the chart, these rates of missing classes are pretty similar between the sectors. So this is not a sector-specific problem, it's a broader problem. As we discussed earlier, a higher proportion of students attending two-year institutions were parents. They're also working longer hours in that sector, but students experience challenges with missing classes at similar rates, regardless of sector, for both childcare issues and job conflicts. Now, despite the financial worries and barriers experienced by many students, most respondents feel that college is worth the investment. 73% of respondents said that the cost of college is a good investment for their financial future. We did see a little bit of a difference by sector with this. 78% of two-year respondents agreed or strongly agreed with this statement, compared to 69% of four-year respondents. And then 84% of respondents overall agreed or strongly agreed that a college degree will provide them with a higher quality of life. We don't see as much difference between the sectors on this one. 85% among our two-year respondents and 82% among our four-year respondents. So there is an interesting difference that we see on these two questions between the sectors, but overall, a majority of students feel that college is worth the cost and will improve their lives. And it's nice to see these numbers, because we know that extensive data backs up these beliefs, demonstrating the financial and non-financial benefits gained by those who earn higher education credentials compared to those who don't. Helping students manage priorities and providing support for those in need can help ensure a brighter future for even more potential and current students. The survey data present a variety of implications for campus practice, and we'll be exploring this more throughout the year as we release briefs, toolkits, and reports, where we'll be further analyzing the data. But in this report, we have highlighted 4 key practices for campuses to evaluate. Strategic course scheduling. The course schedule is a crucial element of student success. It is the foundation through which a student's credential completion pathway is built. When schedules are unpredictable and inflexible, students can have a harder time making them work with other commitments in their life, like work or childcare. Things institutions can do, like prioritizing students' availability in the course scheduling process and ensuring predictability in scheduling across semesters, helps modern learners to more effectively plan employment, childcare, transportation, or any of their other needs. And that can help them be academically successful. Work-based learning. Students across the country reported that they work while enrolled, as we saw in the data, and that employment is a primary focus of their time outside of the classroom, as again we saw with the number of hours that they work. Institutions should consider how to provide strategic connection to work-based learning experiences that either provide compensation to offset for missed employment hours, or that are flexible to the current schedule of students, or that are integrated into course experiences so that these benefits can be gained during class hours. All of that can help students who are working while enrolled. Connection to benefits. Many students draw on multiple sources of funding and credit to pay for college, as Allyson went through, and yet they still struggle with financial insecurity that impacts their ability to cover basic life expenses, those basic needs and securities that we looked at earlier. Institutions can leverage their existing data on students to determine who might be eligible for public benefits, and they connect those students to the benefits through things like completing applications or connections to community resources that can provide assistance, or just letting students know that they might be eligible for certain benefits. They may not even be aware, and so that alone would be helpful. This provides a more holistic financial support system for those financially struggling students. And then emergency aid and financial education. The current financial education system, current financial aid system can be slow to respond to changes in a student's financial situation. The Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, or HERF funding, provided through the CARES Act during the pandemic, provided critical and quick relief to students. This program and other emergency aid programs like it have demonstrated the value of that kind of reactive financial support for students in times of crisis. Expansion of these kinds of interventions can assist in decreasing students' reliance on risky credit products like credit cards, payday loans, auto title loans, and buy now, pay later services. And institutions can create educational interventions triggered by those specific credit behaviors. For example, using a credit card to pay for tuition could trigger financial education about interest accumulation and credit card repayment. And these just-in-time educational moments are more likely to stick because they're directly relevant to the student as they're learning about it. And here on our last slide of kind of wellness information, we wanted to provide a little more information about the upcoming Student Financial Wellness Survey. We implement the survey every fall and invite all interested institutions to participate. Participation is free, and participating institutions receive a few things: a summary report with their students' survey responses, alongside a comparison group of schools in their same sector. They also get an infographic that highlights key findings from the survey in a nice, brief format that's easy to share, quick to read. And then new this fall, a de-identified data file of survey responses. You can find more information on our website, trellisstrategies.org/SFWS. The deadline to complete the steps to participate is still a ways out, so plenty of time. You can reach out to us via the contact form on that website or at surveys@trellisstrategies.org if you have questions, if you want to set up a time to talk, if you just want to let us know that you're in, go ahead and reach out. We'd be glad to hear from you. And here you can scan to look at our current or past events to see what's coming up from Trellis Strategies. And I will turn over to Allyson.
Thanks, Carla. And we have been seeing a few questions come in the chat, so we'll kind of just go through those. And then any other questions, anything else that y'all want to know about the Student Financial Wellness Survey, go ahead and feel free to put that in the Q&A function, and Carla and I can answer that. So we can kind of get started here. Let's see. Our first question asks, does the lack of knowledge of food pantries on campus extend to off campus? It would be helpful to know if these students know that pantries exist, if they have the capacity to Google a commonly known resource. This could help institutions understand connections to help seeking behavior and stigma impacts. So I can answer this one. Right now, we only ask about awareness of on-campus food pantries, so our institutional partners can kind of take that information and use that to guide their communication campaigns, how they are reaching out to students. But I really like the point that you're making here. It looks like this is from an anonymous attendee. So, but I really like this point. Right now in the survey, we are asking about awareness of on-campus food pantries and then utilization of on and off-campus food pantries. And let me see if I can grab real quick. Carla, do you happen to know what the utilization of off-campus food pantries looks like? I know it's higher for certain groups. We're more likely to see our parenting students, for instance. I'll talk while Carla pulls that up. I put her on the spot there. We see our parenting students use off-campus food pantries at higher rates. So I do think there is some validity to this point about health-seeking behavior and the impacts of stigma. And what's really been interesting is really those rates of food pantry utilization have remained relatively constant. When we are preparing for today's presentation and working on the aggregate report that will be coming out next week, I believe last year we saw 18% of our respondents utilize a food pantry on or off campus, and this year it was actually just 17%. So really only a slight difference year to year. And we are surveying different students, different schools. There are repeat participants, but it's really interesting to see the kind of rate of utilization remain relatively stable throughout the years that we've been asking that question about food pantries.
Yeah, right. So we're at 17% of all of our survey respondents saying that they had used a food pantry anywhere on or on campus. And of those students who said that, 75% said they used an on-campus food pantry, 36% said they used it off campus, and 4% said other, which we don't have a write-in for that. So not 100% sure what that means, and they could have selected multiple. So they could have used both. So we are seeing a lot of on-campus use, but like Allyson said, we do see differences, which I don't have up right in front of me, but with especially parenting students, that's the one that sticks out in my head too, that they tend to not use on campus resources because they are actually more likely to be online only students. They are more likely to work. So they're generally not on campus as much as the non-campus students.
Great. And we have the wellness survey instrument is quite long. It's about 140 or so questions. It does take on average students, I think, about 12 to 14 minutes to complete, because we do have a kind of filter and display logic to kind of shoot students through the survey, so they're not seeing all the questions. Ideally, in an ideal world, I would love to ask if they're aware of off-campus food pantries, but I just don't think we quite have the space. Let me go to our next question. Same, I'll just keep in the same thread. Is it possible to see the questions you asked regarding basic needs on the survey? I'm curious how the questions are asked and if they align with other basic needs surveys. In the aggregate report that comes out next week, we do have our full survey instrument. At the very back of the report, you can see all of our glorious 140 odd questions, and we do use validated scales from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to measure food insecurity, and then we use validated scales, the PHQ-2 and the GAD-2, to measure the prevalence of symptoms of major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. And then our housing insecurity and homelessness scales were developed in coordination with other researchers in this space, including the Hope Center and Dr. Rashida Crutchfield out of UC Long Beach. So those scales are available at the end of the survey, and we are currently revamping our instrument for 2025, and we'll be taking a look at those housing insecurity and homelessness scales. So those will probably be evolving in our next implementation of the wellness survey this fall. Adrian asks, what data do you have regarding the unique needs of graduate students? I'll pop that over to Carla.
That's a good question. We don't have a huge base of students to work with on that one. We have implemented the survey to graduate students at a few institutions over the years, but it's not been a large base that we see. So it's not something that we've compiled to do its own, looking at just at grad students, because it really is just not a very large number of students. So it's not like the same thing that we're doing with the undergrads here, which is, maybe something we can expand in the future. But I think that probably the biggest thing that we see is that being an online only student is much more prevalent among grad students. And so I think that impacts a lot of what you see in the survey. We have actually an online only version of the survey that we've worked with before that I think would work better with grad students. And that's something that we talk about internally if we go that route, but it would definitely impact, this survey is sort of designed, it allows for students to not be on campus, but we are looking at sort of all students, and that being on campus gives them access to certain resources like on-campus food pantry and whatnot that just aren't applicable to the students who are online only. So I think those are some of the big differences that we would see. But it's an interesting population that I know we all want to know more about.
Right, and we recognize that these issues that we're seeing in the survey, financial insecurity, basic needs insecurity, poor mental health, that's not limited to just undergraduate students. That extends to graduate students, postdocs, and faculty and staff as well. So those are all populations that we're kind of been thinking about doing more survey work with, but there's only so many hours in a day, so we are trying to focus on where we feel like we can make the most impact. But we are available if you would like to survey your graduate students on their basic needs. We're available to discuss that and see how we can kind of meet those needs. Our next question is from Nino. Did your team explore any outcome-focused models or predictive analyses? And so, Carla, I'll kick it to you to talk about our outcome studies that we've been offering for the last few years.
Right. So the Student Financial Wellness Survey is a point in time survey of students who are currently enrolled. So that alone doesn't really have outcomes associated with it, but we do some institutions we have already, and it's something that we would like to continue. We've done what we call outcome studies, where a year or so, 18 months after the completion of the survey, we come back and looking at that same population of students that we received for the survey, the institution adds additional variables, such as GPA, if they stopped out, did they graduate? So we can kind of look at those outcomes if they had any staff issues. So those are just a few things that we look at, and we can take a look at those outcomes compared to how they responded to the survey, so we can see things like if students had those basic needs and mental health issues, were they more likely to stop out or have staff issues and have lower GPAs or things like that. So being able to make that connection for some students. So if anyone is interested in that, please reach out to us. And as I said, that's something that you do the survey first, and then that comes afterwards. So participating in the survey is the first step.
Yeah, and so our outcome studies really take the connection between the responses to the Student Financial Wellness Survey, and you can see how those students were impacted and what kind of what their experiences are like. I think we do 12 to 18 months after implementation, preferably 18 months or longer.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. There are a lot of questions coming in, and I'm hopeful that we'll have time to get through them all. But if not, we will follow up with you to the best of our ability. So let me just see here. The next question I'll just quickly answer, and we can move on. Asks, do you have an idea of the percentage of institutions where you have surveyed students that actually have an on-campus pantry? So we do a scan around during the time that the survey is in the field. So we checked all the institutions last November and found that 90 of the 104 did have a food pantry on campus available to students. So of the 104 institutions, 86.5% offered a food pantry. And that's about what we see year to year. We do see higher rates of institutions providing mental health services, whether that's through on-campus partner, off-campus partner, telehealth, but we do see that at slightly higher rates than the food pantries. Alex asked, does the survey ask questions regarding the source of their aid, scholarships and grants, such as private institutional or federal aid? I'll kick that to you, Carla.
Okay, yes, we do not. We were concerned that might be confusing for students. And so for the way that the survey is right now, it's those categories that were on one of the slides that Allyson did about paying for school, and that's how it is worded for students as well. So, grants includes Pell Grants, but also other grants. And, I think we know from other data sources that Pell Grants are the majority of that, but we did not split out source or type because we didn't want to put that sort of mental load on students to have to think through that as they're responding to the survey. It probably would lead to lower completion rates. So that's mainly why we don't have that in there. But we're curious about that too. We just when we do our cognitive testing with students about the survey questions before we implement them, it was that was a tough one.
Thanks, Carla. Our next question asks does the survey ask if students are taking only online classes and how far they live from campus? Our awareness of our food pantry is low, but we do have many online students who live multiple states away from our physical campus.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, we do ask if they are taking online only, in person only, or a hybrid. We don't ask how far away they live from campus, so we wouldn't be able to know that.
And we also ask about their housing status, if they live on campus, off campus, if they are currently unhoused. So that's really interesting. Should take a note of that, Carla. Next question, Kayleen, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, asks, would you consider adding questions in the future about help-seeking behavior and its intersection with these issues? I can take that one. Currently, the way that we field the survey is that we go through institutional review board review at every institution or get a waiver from the IRB. And one of the ways that we're able to do this survey at no cost, the survey is completely free for all participating institutions, is that we do keep the IRB review and the different types of our compliance issues, kind of keep that as minimal as possible. And we do try to make sure that we're gathering as much data as possible that isn't too sensitive for the student. And so I do think gathering more information on help-seeking behavior could be really useful, but that also might also impact the review time and kind of the depth of the complexity of the institutional review board that we complete every year. But we are also thinking about, for our 2025 implementation, kind of changing things up. And so we are modifying the questions that we're asking. And I think we're going to get a little bit more into help-seeking behavior, but I can't guarantee that that will be on the next implementation of the instrument. Anything to add there, Carla?
No, I think that covers it pretty well. Yeah, like what we see in the Healthy Mind study, they really dive into a lot of sensitive topics, which, like Allyson said, can be super helpful, but we've not implemented that in ours to date because of, some of those kind of stickier issues with getting through IRB and keeping it as efficient as possible for us.
And really trying to make sure that students feel comfortable taking the survey. And really great shout out to the Healthy Mind study, Carla. For everyone on the call, if you're not familiar with that study, they put out really great data. They really dive deep into mental health issues and the behaviors and experiences of students. So would really recommend checking out that resource if you haven't already. They have a really great website where you can pull down reports pretty easily and really get into the nitty-gritty of mental health. Okay, next question, and then maybe one more. Bree asks, with higher rates of basic needs insecurity for certain student groups, were there also higher rates of mental health challenges and working? What, if any, relationships were seen with responses from these students across all the elements highlighted in the survey?
That is very interesting. We have looked at students' mental health issues for certain aspects, but I'm going to add that because we, like I had mentioned, we're going to be doing additional briefs and toolkits and reports and things like that as we continue to look through the data, and always interested in what people are interested in learning about from the data as well. And so I know that we do want to do a deeper dive into the mental health category, and looking at that aspect of it will be really helpful.
And we do have a series of briefs and shorter publications that will be coming out on the 2024 data. And right now, we're kind of slated to do a brief on mental health, looking at students who experience any of the 4 indicators of mental health. So across the GAD-2, the PHQ-2, and loneliness. And we're also going to be looking at differences in experiences by age and kind of getting more nuance. With age, looking at students, 18 to 24, 25 to 29, 30 to 34. We did a little bit of that work last year and found some really interesting differences amongst those groups. But we are not going to be able to get through all the questions. I'm so sorry. We will try to kind of answer these while we get our next session started. But just want to thank everyone so much for joining us for the first half of today's presentation and joining me and Carla. We are going to switch now to our panel, and Carla and I will be hopping off, but we will stay in this Zoom to make sure that we're getting all the good things from our upcoming panelists. So stay tuned, everyone.
Thank you, Allyson and Carla, for the presentation. Very, very much appreciate you walking through all of the findings, and thank you to all of the question askers that we had during that last session. If we did not get a chance to respond to your question, we will do our best to go ahead and try to get you a response separately. And also we are archiving those, especially some of the questions related to the future questions that you are looking to add. I know that we have one question here that's unanswered around preparing to take results to campus stakeholders to determine what to prioritize for next year. And one of the things that we are very, very proud of with the Student Financial Wellness Survey is the practitioner focus of the instrument, and that it is something that can be used on campuses across the country to not only understand your student body, but help to hopefully make some policy, procedure, and practice changes in your daily work. Our panel here today, we are very fortunate to have three panelists with us this afternoon that have all had extensive history with the Student Financial Wellness Survey and have used the data to not only inform campus conversations, but also campus practice. And we're really looking forward to diving further into some of the data points, but then also to ask these panelists how they've been able to use the data over the years on their campuses. And so with that, we'll go ahead and kick off sort of this discussion component of the presentation. Would encourage everybody to continue to use the Q&A feature if you do have questions for our panelists, and we will route those in addition to some of the pre-scripted questions that we have for them here this afternoon. As we do transition, I do just want to flag that we did put in the chat both our research hub as well as our newsletter. As Allyson and Carla mentioned, we will continue to do analysis on the 2024 data, which will result in additional publications coming out, as well as additional webinars and conversations. Those will be highlighted in the newsletter, but will also be available in the research hub. And you can also find some of our historical work that we've done on previous Student Financial Wellness Survey implementations in the research hub as well. With that, I am going to ask our panelists here to come off onto camera is probably the better way to frame that, and we'll sort of move forward without any PowerPoint slide components here, and more in a discussion format. I do want to also highlight, because there have been some questions that have come into the chat, that we are recording this, and so we will be able to distribute the recording as well as the slides that we presented earlier. So just wanted to flag that for everybody as well. So we have Dr. George Williams, Dr. Angela Johnson, and Phil Schuman with us here today. I have had the great privilege of knowing all three of these individuals for a long time and their work on campuses. And I would not be able to do the introductions justice for them. So I will let each of them just say a couple words, maybe in framing around their position on campus, their experience with the instrument, but then also just the way that they view student financial wellness in their daily work. And I think you'll see here that we have three very different seats on campus that offer different perspectives. And so I'm really excited to blend those perspectives here in our conversation today. So George, I'm going to start with you, going to go to Angela, and then go to Phil.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Brian and the crew, for the invitation. Of course, I always accept an opportunity to talk about the Student Financial Wellness Survey as it relates to our institution. Greetings, everyone, from Our Lady of the Lake University in San Antonio, Texas. We have been providing higher education for a higher purpose for the last 130 years by our sisters of the Congregation of Divine Providence. And so really excited. My 14th year here, serving as the executive vice president and chief of staff. I've had several roles on campus. Most important role that I had on campus was serving as the vice president for student affairs, which I have become very familiar and have started our mission and vision as it relates to the Student Financial Wellness Survey. So I'm not sure what else you want me to share, but again, looking forward to our discussion with my fellow colleagues.
Great. Thanks.
Sure. Hi, Angela Johnson with Cuyahoga Community College. I serve as the Vice President of Enrollment Management. Been at the college for 25 years, or I've been saying recently a quarter of a century. Sounds a little bit better. I like to always start with, I grew up in financial aid, so I have a deep knowledge and understanding and background in student financial aid, public and private and proprietary institutions, a wide variety of background, but really kind of stepped into the financial education, financial literacy space, probably about 2007 when we first started doing some early surveys and research and looking at how financial education is impacting students' enrollment, and then really started to focus in about 2012 on basic needs and looking at how we can look at essential needs and packaging that from a student's experience perspective with the keen focus on persistence. And Cuyahoga Community College is in Ohio. It's the largest community college in the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Phil Schuman. I serve as the Executive Director of Financial Wellness and Education for Indiana University, and also as the Executive Director of the Higher Education Financial Wellness Alliance, an organization that's committed to putting forward and helping out practitioners with financial wellness programs on their campus. I should say greetings from Bloomington, Indiana, where it's sunny. This is our big bike race weekend, the Little 5 or the Little 500. If you're not familiar with it, check it out. So everybody, you might hear some background noises happening outside my window right now because it's a nice day out. We'll go with that. But in my role at Indiana University, I oversee the financial wellness and education implementation across all the campuses across the state. So we have 9 in-person campuses, 1 online campus, and we provide financial education direction for those campuses. We implemented the Trellis survey back in fall 2023. And have been using that to help sort of drive what we are doing within the Office of the Vice President for Student Success, which is what we report through, and really trying to use that to help inform us and engage us about what we can be doing better to support our students in their mission to succeed here at IU. The other thing on the HEFWA, on our organization side of things, we're happy that we've been working with Trellis for quite some time, and this year helping implement or partnering with them on their Basic Needs Summit, which is going to happen at our conference later this summer at the University of Utah. I'll probably provide more details because I have learned not to be beyond that at this point, that I have to do some sort of sales as part of this. Brian, thanks for putting that in there. And also, I looked at the participant list. I see a lot of our colleagues from the HEFWA side of things, and just happy to see you all. And thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you all for the introductions, and really excited about the various perspectives that we have here today. I wanted to start off, one of the questions that we have been asking students since 2018, and we've seen consistency in the response to this question, is around their ability to come up with $500 in the case of an emergency. And, we see instruments, across the country that look at anywhere from $300 to $1,000. This number varies depending on the research and the instrument that's being used. And we use $500, but it does seem to be representative of what an emergency may look like for a student: a flat tire, a need for a laptop, or a technology repair. How do you kind of see this as a data point that is impactful for your daily work on campus? And are there any steps that you've taken to address this issue of sort of this financial fragility that students are experiencing? And has it, been a conversation on campus about different supports for students that are in that fragile space? So more than happy for anybody to take that first and build off of each other from there.
Oh, I'm happy to start. Again, at OLU, as many other institutions, we know firsthand how financial instability continues to affect our students. Before the pandemic and post-pandemic, if there's a thing that's called post-pandemic, because it's still, some of that is still residue. Many struggle with housing, right? Many struggle with food insecurity. Many struggle with unexpected expenses, as you mentioned, that pretty much derails their academic progress. Whether it's a medical bill, as you said, or a car repair, or family responsibilities, which is mostly some of the concern, it all are challenges. And these challenges are not just an abstract data point. They're not just an abstract data point. They show up in our student conversations. They show up in our conversations when we are connecting with financial aid appointments, our counseling sessions. So it's more than just the data, right? It's being able to have and engage in those conversations about their overall success. In terms of some steps, we've implemented several initiatives because of this survey, which we have done I think this is our 3rd round this year. We actually are blessed to also bring back a couple of the presenters that you were exposed to earlier to come and present to our leadership cabinet to talk about the 2024 results of the survey. So really excited about that. But the steps that we've taken, we've now offering an emergency aid program, which provides that short-term financial assistance. A lot of questions about food pantry. I've heard that earlier. We have partnered a very strong partnership with our San Antonio Food Bank that supplies, and keeps it stocked, by the way, regularly, access to our students through their partnerships. And then we've been blessed to also provide some opportunities for some private and also some federal grant funding to help address these critical issues that our students across the nation are facing. So we're implementing several initiatives to support our students. We're increasing also student awareness about public benefits, through partnerships with community organizations. We've also expanded our financial literacy programming. This is also by way of Trellis Strategies, because we want our students to not only know what financial is, but understand it, how it relates to their own pockets, right? We've embedded basic needs questions into our advising appointments, into our student support services to identify those students in need. So that's what we've done and then some as it relates to some additional steps.
Talk a little bit about some of our emergency funds. I like to think we were an institution that was an early adopter of emergency funds because we started in 2007 and really thinking about emergency funds. And I think it's important to think about the evolution, because when we started with the emergency funds, it was an emergency loan. So it was $500. Students paid it back, whether it was through their financial aid or incrementally over a period of time, a semester or a year, et cetera. But then we started to realize that there's already challenges. They can't really afford to pay it. But it was seed money that we used from our foundation to really help start the emergency fund program that then evolved into, right now, we probably have about 7 different emergency fund programs. The dollar amount did start at $500, that, sort of been that kind of the sweet spot. But then it's sort of, because we have such increased needs, we reduced it to $350, because what we found is a lot of students, while the max was $500, they made a request of how much they needed, and the average was about $300. And so by reducing it, it really allowed us to provide that to more students, because it is the funds that we use, the 7 different funds that we use. Sometimes they have various criteria. Some criteria might be specific basic needs. Some might be, a donor might be more interested in certain programs like our allied health programs, et cetera. So we've been able to extend the programs, but it's an endowed fund, so we do get those funds every year. So that's been extremely helpful. And then from an emergency perspective, we work very closely within our basic needs program, which we call Project Go, affectionately known as Project Go. And we work very closely with our United Way. They have navigators, housing navigators that really help students with temporary housing situations, connecting them to services and resources in the community. We have on-campus food pantries, but we also connect them to services in the community. And we try to really make sure, especially when we're on break, winter break, spring break, that they know about all these resources in the community when we're not on campus. Because our pantry right now allows students to, on a weekly basis, receive up to 10 pounds of food. So they would go to the pantry. We have 4 campuses. We also see that some students go to more than one campus, and we don't limit that for them. But it's only up to 10 pounds per week. But they can, essentially, if they go to more than one campus, can get more than 10 pounds, because we don't monitor it to restrict them in that way. And our food pantry has been, in addition to some of the funding we receive from donors, we also are in collaboration with the Greater Cleveland Food Bank, which really helps with the funding for the fresh produce for some of our programs.
On my end, I'll go real quick. I mean, we used the data that we got from the Trellis survey to basically put together a report of what exists across the university as it relates to food insecurity, housing insecurity, and taking that and then showing it to our foundation to try and use it to leverage, raising more funds for emergency funds for food insecurity. And actually, yesterday here at IU was what we call IU Day, which we try and find some specific initiatives to do some fundraising off of. And one of them was a project called Food at IU. So really trying to tackle food insecurity at the university using some of the data that we have. And realistically, it looks like it's going really well so far. And so using that data has been really beneficial in helping us further our efforts to address emergency funds, food insecurity, and the other basic needs insecurity as well.
Thank you all for those answers. Dr. Johnson, I'm going to come back to you because there was a question that came in and it's timely and I want to flag it. And I think anytime anybody hears housing solutions, there's always like a lot of interest because it's one of the more challenging things to support students with. And so I'm actually going to kind of tie in the next question I have with this request for you to maybe elaborate more on housing. But one of the data points that Allyson and Carla mentioned earlier is that we're at a point now where over a third of students are identifying as a worker that goes to school rather than a student that works. And like the way that we view this at Trellis is that we're shifting personas, and a lot of our student retention literature is like based on these ideas of a student is a student and focuses on being a student. We know that life and other personas are kind of overtaking that student persona. So how do we kind of, in your different roles on campus, how do we think about the student's broader financial life and the fact that being a student is a subset of that, when you're addressing these issues? And I think housing is a great example of this and maybe a good opportunity for you to expand a little bit on the United Way work.
Yeah, I think first, I think the identity of the worker first is we've seen that even we saw before the pandemic, but I think we've seen so much pre-pandemic when you think about what's happening in the gig economy, when students are trying to really have some flexibility in their work life to figure out their class schedule to continue to persist and what that might look like for them as a worker first focus in their identity. So let me talk a little bit about, we have a couple different housing opportunities with United Way. So they have a very specific navigator for housing, housing navigator that works with our students and others in the community. But what we've been able to do is connect with them so that students don't have to tell the multiple times what's happened that's causing their unhoused situation, is really helping them navigate available resources in the community. And what we found, and you can imagine that most individuals, the shelter is probably the last resort for them. So we have found that a lot of students or others aren't interested in the shelters. So we're really working with them on other solutions. They may be temporary solutions. Sometimes they help with funding resources for temporary stay at a temporary hotel situation. We are a community college, and you all know most don't have dorms. We don't have those, but we do have what really launched for us in fall of 23 is we have a scholar house right near one of our campuses. It is a 20-bed unit for student parents. And it's been full since we actually launched. We certainly are looking at other options that we might think of at the institution as far as housing, but United Way is a really great partner and really giving us like a direct line to their navigator and really helping with other solutions. And some other solutions that might also be with our, that they direct our students to is temporary experiences at either the YWCA or YMCA in our community that really helps with temporary. But it is that close connection that's really been helpful for us. But we did use the survey to really look at how the housing experience needed to be expanded, which is how we ended up being one of the partners with Scholar House. It's not just for Cuyahoga Community College. Cleveland State University is within 1 mile of that campus. Case Western Reserve is just down the road, but any of the students in any of those communities. But we have found that 90% of the 40 units are Cuyahoga students.
Dr. Williams, Phil, do you have any thoughts on sort of that worker versus student persona? More than happy to advance to the next question as well.
I mean, to me, it's not a surprise that you're seeing more students identifying as workers first. As the cost of being a person continues to go up and up and up, the ability to be able to pay for college out of pocket becomes harder and harder. So I think you're seeing that gravitational pull of students becoming or seeing themselves more as workers because they're having to work more hours in order to pay for the school that they're doing. And so this is obviously one of the challenges we're trying to figure out is like, how do we address we talked about tuition costs going up and up for so much time, and they continue to go up, but certainly not to the percentage that they used to. But with inflation, the cost of just everything that it costs to be a human being outside of school going up, how do we support students as they try and figure out how to navigate those two things? Because I think as things get more expensive and it gets harder to pay for school, they're going to be working more hours, and it's going to be harder for them to be able to complete their academics in as little as time as we would like them to.
And I'll just briefly add that, we've been also focusing on student employment. What does that look like for GA-ships as well, TA-ships, so that we can maximize on opportunities for our students to stay and work on campus and continue to be successful. So we've been exploring what that looks like for additional investment for that platform and being able to make sure that our students have opportunity if they need to work. Let's do it here on campus.
Great. Thank you all for all of those responses. A couple things here. I have a couple more questions just sort of on the data and thinking about how you've used the data on your campus. And so I'll ask some of those and then maybe take a pause to jump into some of the questions that we're seeing that are coming in via the Q&A. Y'all have received institutional data from us. Some of, Dr. Johnson, Dr. Williams, you've used this instrument a few times, and Phil, we just recently went through it. Was there anything that was surprising in the data? Anything that kind of affirmed conversations you were having? And then, any advice back to the question that we had on the last portion of the session? Any advice for campuses that have received data on how to kind of use it and socialize it within your campus community?
I've I talked about how we sort of used it, but the one thing that keeps coming that's surprising, we saw it in the data again this year, is just it continues to be the percentage of students who say that college is worth it, more or less, right? That we're talking about a report that says these are all the challenges that students are facing on a year in, year out basis. They're going through food insecurity, they're going through housing insecurity, they're having all of these mental health issues as well. And then we come back and we see in the 70s and 80% percentiles, they want to be here and they see the reason and the value of being there. And for me and for our team within, the Office of Vice President for Student Success here at IU, like we see that as a call to action, that we have our students doing everything they possibly can be doing in order to get their degree. So we need to make sure that we're being as equal in them and putting forth as much effort as possible to supporting them in that endeavor. That stat, that's the first thing I actually look for each year this report comes out, because I just want to see sort of the optimistic standpoint of this report. With so many challenges that students are facing, they're still saying they want to be here and they know why they want to be here.
Yeah, I think, Phil, what you said earlier, too, is taking a look at the services and resources you have on your campus and looking at the alignment. And I think that's one of the first things is really understanding what programs you have available, which partners you might have in the community that you can connect with, but really finding sometimes the audacity to have the conversation. So what we've done a few years ago is we started an Institute for Economic Mobility. And that's the newest name for it. It actually used to be called something else that we moved away from the name because we thought it was not asset focused. It used to be called the Poverty Institute. And we have a faculty member who leads this effort. She's a psychologist and is incredibly involved in really understanding in the greater Cleveland area, what does economic mobility look like for our students and individuals in our community, and really having the audacity to have the conversation about what the impact is on our community and our students moving through, not only just through the colleges and the classes and their program, but really moving to economic mobility when they graduate, when they leave us, and what does that look like from a broader perspective. So when we started our basic needs program, we we had some difficult conversations and getting everybody to understand why this work was really important and why it was important for us to do it as an institution, and making sure that we were helping students connect with temporary services and supports while they're students, that help them move into the next level for their next economic rung, and what that looks like for them and for their families. But finding the right individuals, I think my advice, Brian, to your question is finding the right individuals on your campus and in your community that's going to help you move the dial on this work, and finding the partnerships, finding a sustainability model, and really thinking about this as a ongoing iterative process. Because what we find in our survey, I think we started the survey in 2019. And so we've been doing this with you all like every other year, every year. But what we've been finding is continuing to add services and supports based on students' feedback, and then also communicating with students how these supports can help them be successful, and really trying to make sure this is a part of a wraparound student engagement effort. And it really takes everyone at the college to really help support that. One of our most recent endeavors is that we developed a culture of care video and training for all faculty and staff, so that they know about all these services and supports, because we know students are spending the time in the classroom. It's important that faculty know about all these services and supports, how to direct students, where they can go. Not that they become experts, but they know these supports exist. And when they're having these discussions with students, they know where the resources are and how we can help them navigate.
I'll add that I remember, like Dr. Johnson mentioned, I think we were 2019 as well when we first started every other year. And I remember the first meeting we had, we invited the reps from Trellis to come out and present the data to both faculty and staff. To your question about surprising, I think it was eye-opening. It was an eye-opening element for our faculty and staff to sit in a room together to listen to and dive deep with the data that we were experiencing, with our students, and the fact that our students were experiencing food and housing insecurity. Even though it appeared to us that they were academically thriving, there was still some anecdotal evidence to show that there was still something going on with them with regards to their insecurities, right? And so it was also affirming, right, to see how many students balance multiple roles, working, as we mentioned, caregiving, as was discussed earlier, studying, and how these responsibilities truly directly impacted their academic outcomes. So the data, as we get every other year now, it helps validate what many of us here at the institution have been informally and have given us and also have given us leverage to advocate more effective target resources for our students. So it's again, it's more than just those data points. It's then what are we going to do about it? And having conversations like this to provide opportunities to have those targeted resources is one way to do it.
That's great. Thank you all for your responses there. I want to, and this will be my last one before turning it over to the questions that are coming in the chat, and then we can come back to the pre-scripted ones if we have some time. So encourage anybody who has any questions for the panelists to go ahead and drop those in at this time. But Phil mentioned something earlier, about the optimism of the report, right? We see all these challenges that students face, and we talk a lot about the challenges and the interventions that can wrap around those challenges. But historically, we've seen a pretty optimistic response from students. One of the things that we noticed this year, and Carla and Allyson will continue to do some analysis on this, so look for a brief, and I don't have all the answers to it now, but interested in your perspective on it, is this gap between this idea of a college degree will provide me with a higher quality of life, and the cost of college is a good investment in my financial future. So 82% of four-year respondents said that, a college degree will provide me with a higher quality of life, but only 69% said that it was a good investment in their financial future. 85% and 78% for community colleges. So that, that delta is a little bit smaller there. But, I think this is an important distinction to pull apart as we think about trust and how people are perceiving post-secondary education. this idea of it is a higher quality of life. It may lead to different opportunities, but that financial future is questionable. And so interested in how you all view kind of that finding in the work that you're doing every day.
Okay, say the last part of your question once more.
So I think the last part was really that we see this gap, right, between a degree or credential leading to a higher quality of life versus being a good investment in your financial future. And I guess to editorialize a little bit more, for decades, we've talked about going to college leads to better income, leads to more income, leads to et cetera, et cetera. And I'll maybe tee this up a little bit for you here, where you all have done a lot of work on debt letters and thinking about responsible borrowing. Where does borrowing fit? And, there's an income component to your financial future, but there's also a debt service component to your financial future and deferred income and all those other pieces. And so when we start to see people that are a little bit more hesitant about the return on the financial side, there's a variety of reasons for that, but debt could be a piece, the salaries and wage stagnation could be a piece, and I think that's a complex thing to answer. But, how do you think about that in the work that you're doing as you're working with students?
I mean, this is sort of where financial education comes into play. Because I think what you're talking about there are all the variables that go in that could cause the investment in an education to go wrong post-graduation or even during college. I mean, because we think about this in terms of, when you borrow in order to buy a home, when you borrow in order to buy a car, you're getting a tangible asset in that moment. You know the thing that you're getting. Granted, with a car, it's more than likely going to be a depreciating asset. In the case of a home, there's always the it's an investment because that's the way that it's treated. Higher ed is a really weird thing to deal with because it's not a tangible asset that you're getting. You are borrowing a bunch of money in order to hopefully get a piece of paper that's going to open up a door of opportunities that hopefully is going to pay off in the end. And you have to hope that everything as best as possible goes from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. You also have the stat in there about the amount of borrowing that we've taken on is more or less whatever. There's an educational component to that as well, because what we've got in a lot of cases is a national narrative around higher education being more of a pain than it is a benefit. That's the narrative that people have latched onto, and that's a narrative that higher education institutions have to combat at this point. And I think that goes into that stat right there, where we need to make sure that we're doing as much education as possible, helping students understand what we can provide them to make sure that they're going to get the most value for, what they're paying for, but then also giving them the tools and the skills that once they graduate, they're going to put themselves in a position where they can make the most of that investment. And we need to frame it as much as we can and combat that narrative that this is an investment in their future. It's just a different kind of one than most people are used to.
Yeah, I tend to agree with from the broader financial education perspective too. So generally, community college students are part-time, right? And so what we found through the pandemic, typically we had 60% of our students part-time pre-pandemic. Now at Cuyahoga, it's about 79. So we often think about, and you've seen the literature where time is the enemy. When it's taking you longer to complete, lots of things are happening in your life that might challenge your completion. Lots of that is financial, work commitments, family commitments. Things are changing over a period of time. But I started to think about the financial education around being really deliberate and clear with outcomes by careers. And so we've been really thinking more deeply about being clear with students about this major is equivalent to this starting or mid-range salary in a different way. And what's happening, there's lots happening in Ohio, but one of the things that is happening, we've been doing at our institution, and now we'll be going across the state, is the notion that you probably heard around the country, just a few states are doing this, but around direct admission, where students are being directly admitted, so removing the barrier of admission, streamlining that process, so institutions will have the ability to admit students directly, and then you have to talk about the financial part of this. And the reason I think that's important in this conversation is when you directly admit students, they're not, in some cases, at a community college in particular, if they could be admitted, in our case, 22 different community colleges across the state, the value proposition is what programs you offer, what salary I might have when I finish, and thinking really differently about the steps to enroll, but thinking more about the end game and helping students to future pace what the end game is, what the salary might be, and what the family sustaining wage is. And that's got to be part of the early conversation. It's not the graduation and alumni conversation. It's the recruitment conversation, and kind of really re-engineering the way we do that from a recruitment perspective, and then helping students to think about that from a financial perspective, and certainly providing the supports along the way. But we have to be talking about salary and programs and what students are really getting themselves into for that investment and for that financial commitment as we recruit them.
I want to hang out on the two R's, right? Recruitment and retention. So first, recruitment, absolutely. I'm raising a 12 and 11-year-old, and I know I'm privileged enough to have the education to provide to them what it means to be financially savvy and being able to be strategic about that. So I get it, right? So we now are also raising kids that are, and I say kids, students that are strategic and informed about their education, right? Choosing college and choosing funding. So that's the recruitment piece, right? Is to understand that some students, majority of our students, in my opinion, at least in our community, come to us with very savvy ways of understanding the total cost of attending college, right? And then being able to understand what that balance looks like for career-focused programs like STEM. What is the job market is looking like in terms of the demand, but also understanding and considering their return on investment at the early age. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that we are in the business of ensuring that students that enter the doors of our university campuses, colleges, community colleges, that we ensure that they have the tools that they need to continue to stay, right? So that's the retention piece. And I tell my folks all the time, we have a moral obligation. Once our VP of enrollment and the crew bring new students at our institution, we are morally obligated. We are morally contract with them to be able to make sure that they graduate. That also includes reminding them of being financially invested into their education, right? Being career invested. And then what does that look like for the resources? So in short, today's students are much more financially aware. They're much more career conscious. They're much more resourceful when it comes to navigating college and its costs. We have to make sure that we're leveraging, more options for what does that look like for affordability, especially at a private institution where I live, researching and continuing to research the value of their degree, right? So as a campus community, we are obligated to ensure not only that they stay, but we continue to inform students on their career pathways and what does that look like for the demand that continues to evolve over time.
Thank you all for the responses there. And I think, this is one of those questions that cuts across, not just student finances, but really kind of the whole conversation that we're having right now about post-secondary education and how we continue to evolve and maintain relevance to that point around changing, consumers, if we can call it that, right? Kind of the changing consumer sentiment around it. And I think your answers and your engagement there are good examples of how we can do that. Transitioning a little bit to some of the questions that have come in here, I think we have one here that is asking about this idea of training and skill development opportunities for frontline staff. And so I think, Dr. Williams, I think you mentioned some of the screening questions and other things that you build into your advising model. Dr. Johnson, I know you have a lot of experience working and managing, a lot of student-facing operations. This question really asks, how do we get into efficacy building for that population, and in what functional areas can we do that and build some opportunities that, can help them with intervention. So would love any thoughts on that. I think that's a good question about how we take these conversations campus wide and really engage.
Yeah, I think part of it for us is so when we started some of our financial education, it did start in the financial aid office, but we certainly have lots of faculty who do a lot of who teach finance, and they do speakers bureaus, and they kind of really focus on that. But what we've been trying to do is to really make sure that all the frontline staff really understand the services and resources that we provide. I'd mentioned earlier about our culture of care training, so that we can really train the college at scale about all these services and resources. But we also want to make sure that as students are coming to our office, they're coming to the lines, or they're making an appointment with a financial aid advisor or an admission navigator, that they have the comfort of sharing what challenges they might be facing. And whether it's we're working on a professional judgment as it relates to their financial aid because their income has changed, since they completed the FAFSA, since it's, 2 years prior. So we're looking at past income versus the present situation, or whether it's talking about an emergency situation. So we are fortunate that we do still participating in a U.S. Department of Education grant for basic needs, a significant dollar contribution, almost $1 million, to help us with expanding and scaling some of our basic needs, which includes three positions, 2 navigators and a coordinator for that. But those individuals are trained around from a social work perspective and connected with our Ohio Benefits Bank and connecting them with services and supports, but also doing the training. So getting back to the question around training, but the training the staff around the sensitivity of the information that we provide and the confidentiality as it relates to how student brings pretty vulnerable situations to us, and also finding an opportunity to get the student the funding versus finding the opportunity to not provide the funding. And that's been really important for us. For the students who do receive our emergency funds, there's very few students who may not receive it. What we've been able to do over the last couple of years, because it's been now widely communicated to students, so lots of students are aware of it. We do only allow students for emergency fund once per year. It used to be every semester, but we couldn't fund it. We just have too many students. We have, with our credit and non-credit, we have about 44,000 students. So we're trying to really be judicious as we can across all areas. But it's just important that everybody is trained about the sensitivity in working with students, and also not making students constantly repeat the stories over and over, and giving people the autonomy to make some of those decisions on the front line.
I'll add that don't just drop the results in an email. You got to socialize it, right? You have to use the data, as mentioned before, to tell the story. Include the student voices whenever possible. People like real experiences that make it relatable. It's hard to ignore a student story, right? It's harder to ignore it. So for sure, we found it that combining the statistics, right, the data points with real experiences makes the findings more relatable and like I said, harder to ignore. One of the things that we also have done is ensure that the early adopters, faculty members, advisors, but we incorporated students. Students talk to other students. They don't want to talk to this guy that has growing gray hair going around until I see my barber, by the way, just saying. But they want to talk to other students. And so we've also trained other students. It's this, creating this cross-functional team with our student peers, peer mentors, to ensure that they are also helping other students and giving them the resources that they need in order for them to continue to be successful. So I would also encourage, right, not only informing the faculty, staff, advisors included, that includes your financial aid folks, your student business office, your bursar's office, the librarian, but also make sure if you have a platform right now that you can train and do it in a very strategic and for sure confidential way, your peer mentors, those are the ones that they're talking to the most, your student leaders. And so we've done a lot of work with cross-training them and cross-functional teams to ensure that the data isn't just siloed. All of us are a part of this together at our institution. So I encourage you to do that.
Thank you both for that. Dr. Johnson, there was also a question here, and you kind of alluded to some of this with your emergency aid process around, how do we make sure that we aren't asking students to just trauma dump as a part of the emergency aid application, and this idea of, are there any best practices to measure and assess need, and kind of how do you create boundaries throughout that process? I know everybody really got experience with emergency aid in some way, shape, or form through HERF, but it was a very broad application of emergency aid, and you all are fortunate to have a well-funded program. But any thoughts that you have on that, or Dr. Williams or Phil as well?
Yeah. So again, an iterative process. So when we started early on, our foundation was very interested in lots of documentation. And through the evolution, especially one that we have that's focused on basic needs, and one of the basic needs we all know and we've been talking about is food. And from a food insecurity perspective, you can't document that. You can't document that in any significant way. So we had to get folks to really think differently about, do we really require documentation? Again, we're in our best practice, allowing students at least once per year, I think, has been a best practice for us, because we don't have to then think that, we don't have to think about students making up stories. I think if a student is vulnerable enough to give you some information, that you have to take, that conversation very seriously. And they're sharing something that isn't easy to talk about, right? And so they're sharing that information and making sure that you can provide the resource, if you have the resources, to share that with them. I think one best practice has been, again, looking at this annually, not over documenting, even if it's a car repair. That used to be a part of our process. We moved away from that. I think we also provide all students with bus passes in our region, so that you can do a bus pass or like this a tram. But the reality is that's not the best solution for everyone. So looking at other ways that we really help them provide, car repairs, but not over documenting, not over questioning, and also thinking about the flexibility. And I think you're trying to really find a yes is the best practice. If you have the resources, you can provide it, and not ask them to answer too many detailed questions.
I mean, in the broad scale of financial education, pretty much anything, we see a lot of students who don't want to come talk to us because they feel like they're going to be judged. They feel like they're going to be stigmatized for whatever their situation is. And if you create a best practice, or the best practice to create is creating an environment where a student isn't going to feel judged or stigmatized for whatever's going on, not to mention, who knows what the root cause of a student's emergency is, in the sense of, yeah, it could have been the car breaking down, but maybe they would have had enough money to pay for the car had this medical debt not happened. Like, there are so many different things that could happen and to isolate it and say, like, what's the thing that caused all of this is a really hard thing to do for a student. And so I like Dr. Johnson's point here of just finding the path to yes. Because there might be a couple bad actors in this who are just trying to get extra money, but for the most part, students are there because they have a need. And again, it's our responsibility to make sure that we get them the support that they need so they can continue on.
I just want to say moral contract. We have a moral contract. That's it.
Yes, thank you for that. Well, another question that we have here kind of gets into this relationship with community-based organizations and nonprofits. And we have a lot of these conversations about increasingly post-secondary education is serving some of the same individuals that these nonprofit and community-based organizations would serve. We know that there aren't enough resources to go around for these support networks. But how do you sort of think about, kind of that relationship between the institution or the entity from a post-secondary perspective with your community-based and nonprofit organizations? Where do those lines separate? Where are they blended / where do you maybe take on responsibilities that those organizations would take on? And just how do you approach that philosophically within your institutions?
I guess, sorry, I was trying not to be first. I'm happy to, because, we think about, we are county funded, right? I think that's really important about who we are as an institution. We receive levy funding. We rely very heavily on our county partners. And what we've tried to do is approach this with our citizens, our students are your citizens, and from the county perspective. And that's how we've been able to get some of our data sharing agreements with some of our county partners, and having them help us think about the supports that students may be eligible for, and make with some, of course, data sharing agreements, as well as student informed consent, just to be really deliberate about that. Just make sure that as we're looking at those supports and resources. But we actually recently, about a year ago, what we did was we wanted to assess the county partnerships from how students are using the services and resources. And we did a focus group with our students. We have 4 campuses. We did a focus group on all of our campuses. And what we were trying to do was deepen our partnerships within our various communities near our campuses, and then broadly from the county perspective, and getting partnerships across. It's just some really broad partnerships. Sometimes it's with some of our churches, some of our nonprofit agencies, et cetera. But we wanted to hear about the services and supports that we share with students as a part of our basic needs in financial education engagement. How is the service when they go? Is the partnership meeting your needs? And in cases where we heard they weren't meeting their needs, we had a conversation with the partner, and it was a broad conversation. Like, how might we do this together? How might we deepen our partnership? Here's some feedback from our students. And we were really trying to approach this with, how do we all win here by providing these better supports and services? Here's what the students have experienced when they work with the agencies. And I'm sure sometimes they share what they experience when they're on our campus as well, but sharing that experience, but just really trying to deepen the partnership by having these open conversations, but really sharing what students have told us in ways that we can all do better. But really trying to approach this from a win-win. And we are in Northeast Ohio, as we say, so trying to strengthen the economy in our region in Northeast Ohio, and doing that collectively and together from a partnership perspective.
I'm happy to share real quick that, the philosophy here for our institution is to ensure that we are building and aligning our partnerships with outside organizations within our mission, right? And so it's truly about creating this mutually beneficial collaboration that aligns with our mission and values. We are a Catholic institution. We're grounded in social justice. We're grounded in community service. We're grounded in academic excellence. And we seek partners and partnerships that support those types of principles. One of them, and I'll just speak, two, is the student development and career opportunities. All of this is folded into, again, this tool, right, the Student Financial Wellness Survey, that helps us to truly understand and unpack what that looks like for the future of our current students, and what that looks like for supporting those incoming students. So providing partnerships that provide students with internships, job placements, mentorship opportunities, career pathways are highly, highly valued here at the Lake. And so these partnerships aim to, again, to support the holistic development of students. It's one thing you come to school here, but also you got to leave here, right? And we want you to leave here with the role of understanding what that means to you as a productive citizen in these United States and abroad. And then secondly, I cannot say this enough, and I'm happy to say it, that's the faith and values-based collaboration. And I can say it because I'm at a Catholic institution, right? And the fact that, we seek partnerships that respect and promote our faith-based mission. This may include collaboration with faith-based organizations, ministries, service-oriented groups that are dedicated to serving others in line with our Catholic social teaching. So overall, OLU's philosophy of partnerships with other organizations is truly built around creating a positive change, enhancing educational experiences, and I would say supporting our mission to empower our students in the community.
Thank you both for that response. We have, kind of one other question here, and then one other scripted question that we had. So I'll maybe put these out to you all, and if you could each maybe respond to one of the two, and then we'll transition to some closing thoughts, and really appreciate your perspective throughout the conversation today. But we do have a question in the chat, and I'll ask our team to also drop some of our resources in to the chat around supporting parenting students. And, in particular, we've had some legislation in Texas that has created some parenting student navigators to help students to navigate, but childcare is one of the components here, and we know that that's a huge issue for many of our student parents. The second question that we had kind of pre-scripted that we didn't get to is some of the intersectionality of these issues that we've been talking about. And one of those that we've seen in the data pretty clearly is the intersectionality between mental health and finances. And so that, is if you maybe want to pick one, parenting, students, childcare, those pieces, or mental health to respond to, and then we'll go to some closing thoughts and close out the day. So thank you.
I'm probably more qualified to talk about the intersectionality piece because we have some other people doing some great work with our students who are also parents here on campus. So, in the notes that you've shared with us, how you view the intersectionality between rising student mental health concerns and student finance concerns on your campus. We're trying to be more strategic in terms of how we align our organization to make sure that there's constant communication between our mental health efforts and then also our financial efforts as well, because we see those two things as going hand in hand. Obviously, the inclusion of both these topics in the survey sort of speaks volumes to that. We're seeing a lot more universities. So speaking from the HEFWA side of things, we're seeing a lot more universities who are now aligning their basic needs programs as part of their financial wellness programs as well. It's part of the reason why we're trying to bring in the Basic Needs Summit with Trellis into the HEFWA Summit this year, was just because we see those two things are intersecting. And so they need to be discussed as a critical component together as opposed to separate. This is sort of a broad answer, but basically this is to say we see the value in having this conversation because as student financial concerns continue to go up, their feelings of stability are going to go down, and those feelings of stability are really going to play into their mental health. And so we need to make sure that we're taking a wraparound approach to this. My job before being in financial wellness was as a social worker, and I remember seeing the kids that I worked with and the families that they were a part of. If they couldn't feel stable for any given moment of time, there was no ability for them to be able to focus on the future. And so we see that as being a critical thing here in higher ed, and we're trying to adopt that approach as well.
I'm happy to talk about the student parent, some of the efforts. So I mentioned that we have Scholar House, and it is a 40-unit facility. So certainly a small population of students that it's supporting, but we provide wraparound services because it is adjacent to our metropolitan campus. And although I mentioned earlier that students from Cleveland State University or Case or others in that area are also welcome to the facility, it is not our facility. It is a Cleveland Metropolitan Housing Authority facility, and we are a partner. But we do wraparound support services. There's childcare as a part of that experience there. There is mental health support. Academic advising, tutoring services, and supports as a wraparound. So really using that as a model and how might we scale somewhat of a model. And on one of our campuses, we are looking at and implementing, I think, as over the summer and going into the fall, we're implementing the model that you may have heard around the country with partnership with the YWCA for the after-school childcare experience on campus, which we hope that some of our students who are interested would take part in that. It is a campus that doesn't have a facility nearby, so we thought that might be an opportunity to see what that might look like. But you're also probably hearing about the colleges who have a little bit more space on campus because students are online or, in some cases taking fewer classes. So there's a little bit more space availability. But we're looking at that partnership and trying to see if we can do this at the one campus, which is one of our campuses that is far out in our county. Might we do this at our other campuses, particularly the one that's in the inner city in Cleveland? But that's one thing that we're looking at is trying to provide that childcare, bring it on campus. As I mentioned earlier, I've been at the college for a little bit of time, long enough to remember when we did have a childcare center on campus. And what we learned during that time, we did close that center maybe about 15 or so years ago. But what we learned is that our students weren't the ones using those childcare services. And the reason they weren't using them is because they need more part-time and flexible opportunities than the full-time, because they need it when they were in classes. So really still trying to look at how we scale up that support.
I'll just simply echo my colleagues. I know we're approaching time, and I'm glad that Dr. Johnson, you mentioned flexibility. I was just simply going to mention exactly that. We don't offer a childcare center any longer, but we do offer flexible scheduling, which should be considered with regards to students that are parenting as well. We know that's a different type of balance, in terms of that. And so, but being able to offer the flexible scheduling for our students, weekend, college, is something that we do here as well, while we're also supporting them with resources like counseling services, tutoring, which is all available online for students as well. So.
Thank you all. And I do want to give you all a quick 15, 30 seconds for any last thoughts that you have, but thank you for all of your perspectives here today. So Phil, anything from your end, then Dr. Johnson and Dr. Williams?
I mean, on my end, just a broad statement of appreciation to everybody who's on this call, who's interested in this field and continue to do the good work in supporting students. It's been nice to see the growth in this field and just the focus that's been placed on basic needs, on financial education over the course of the last decade plus. So just thank you for the work that you're all doing, and let us know how we can be supportive of your efforts.
Yeah, I think I always like to tell people to start somewhere. Think about what your students' needs are and start somewhere. Sometimes if it's challenging to figure out where to start, let the data really guide you and get the feedback from your students and let the data guide you. Using the data that we talked about here through the Trellis survey, but also consider focus groups as well and get some qualitative feedback from your students to really help build the case of how you might scale it up on campus and getting your institutional buy-in.
And I'll just simply add that the Student Financial Wellness Survey isn't just a data tool, it's a catalyst for change. It helps us, at least for us, and I'm sure others, move from assumption to action. It also reminds us that beyond every percentage point is a student trying to hold it all together. So if you want to help students not just attend college, but complete it, then this work has to be done very centralized, very collaborative, and very continuous. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for that. And Phil, Angela, George, thank you so much for all the work that you are doing day in and day out to support learners on campus. And we very much appreciate your perspective and you taking the time to share it with everybody here today. Thank you to everybody who tuned in today and has been a part of this journey with the Wellness Survey. We are very appreciative of that, and in particular to all of the learners that have shared their voices with us over the years. I would just close by also thanking our Trellis team, Allyson and Carla, for all of the great work on the data, but also the many, many other people at Trellis who are involved in data collection, data cleaning, and working with our institutions. Many of you know Abby, who has onboarded so many of our institutions as well. In closing, there was one last question that I saved from Jeff Webster, who we have to thank really for all of this work and his time at Trellis, asking about NCES and some of the changes that have happened at the Department of Ed. And NPSAS has collected a lot of this data at a national level. And we remain concerned about the future of data collection, and we're hopeful that we can continue to have conversations about prevalence in the field and that we can continue to use some of the data as an opportunity to make sure that student and learner voices are represented in these conversations. And it may not be as representative as NIPSAS's and other instruments, but that data-driven approach to these conversations and the learner voice, both from the focus groups that Dr. Johnson mentioned to Dr. Williams talking about making sure that data is in the hands of everybody across campus, including students, is incredibly important for us. So thank you all for the work that you do across the field. Thank you for joining us today, and a huge thank you to our panelists for spending some time with us this afternoon. Take care, everybody.